Mirror's Edge. Every now and again you come across a game that looks like a breath of fresh air, something creative and boring. Wait, no, that's not what I meant. Something creative and new in an otherwise boring world of boredom. A game that makes you say, wow, what the heck, sign me up for this. And boy, howdy is Mirror's Edge one of those games. Everything about Mirror's Edge just looks so cool to me. I mean, sure, I've seen games try to tackle the whole parkour free running thing before, and the story didn't really seem that original, but man did this grab my attention. And seeing as Mirror's Edge Catalyst is just around the corner, I thought what better time to give this game another run through. I'll say it right now, the story in Mirror's Edge is definitely not one of its strong points. Not only is the story just like borderline non-existent, but the method in which the game tells the story is not very effective at all. To put it simply, the game centers around faith, one of the last shreds of humanity in an otherwise Orwellian totalitarianism society. By which I mean the city that this game takes place in is 100% controlled and monitored by the government, or whatever this game's equivalent to that is, to the point where it's pretty much aperture science in the form of a utopian metropolis. So Faith is more or less this rebellious punk who gets embroiled in a murder mystery, and she's trying to find out who killed some guy, and other people get tangled up in it too, and she's been framed for it, and her sister's a cop and she's been framed for it as well, and it's kind of a mess and it isn't really that great. The thing is though, I definitely put this down to a failed execution rather than a failed concept. I really like what this game sets up, and I really especially like the world that the game takes place in, but it just kind of falls apart more and more as it goes along. This isn't really helped by the fact that the game is mostly told through stylistic animations instead of in-game cutscenes. This creates a huge disconnect from this animated world to this stunningly authentic, realistic world, and it's kinda jarring to be thrown back and forth between them. There are some story moments that are pretty cool and engaging, but that's mostly because the gameplay 100% carries it. If this was a story told in a regular game with regular gameplay, it wouldn't really leave any kind of impact. But man, oh man, does this game feel great to play. Pulling off parkour tricks and finding multiple different ways to get through one environment just feels really good. It makes me feel like Michael Scott from The Office. It makes you feel like you're actually running across the tops of real buildings. Not game worlds specifically designed in a linear way for you to get from A to B, designed on a computer in some developer studio made by a guy who's gonna get paid like £5 for that rooftop that he designed. Well done, everyone, you're promoted. But authentic rooftops that you have to make your way around. I mean, the gameplay definitely isn't perfect. There are quite a few hiccups every now and again when the game doesn't really get what it is you're trying to do, but when it works, it just works. Mirror's Edge does a great job of making you feel like you're in a real city, a real world that yet somehow manages to make you feel very isolated. Again, quite like aperture science in a wide open city. I didn't make that comparison to Portal earlier just for the sake of a one-liner. Mirror's Edge actually has quite a few things in common with Portal. One of the things I really liked about Portal is how claustrophobic it made you feel as a player. At no point would I say that the game is ever really pleasing to the eye, at least not in the traditional sense. As you're solving test chambers, all you ever really see are cold, lifeless colours. This is a facility created with function in mind, not a visually pleasing aesthetic. And on top of that, you don't ever actually get to see another human being. Sterile, lifeless, and lacking any kind of personality or compassion, you are surrounded by the only things that could possibly make a facility like this: robots and androids. Of course, there is more to the story than that to aperture science, and you do find out why there aren't any people around, but I'm speaking purely about how the game makes you feel. I'd say Mirror's Edge has that exact same quality, the main difference being instead of making you feel isolated in tiny rooms and narrow corridors, it makes you feel isolated in a gigantic city with an open blue sky. Sure, you do get to see other people every now and again, but you never get to interact with civilization itself. You only really get to see it from a distance, whether it's on the other side of a window, at the end of an alleyway, from the top of a building, or the other side of a fence. You always feel like an outcast, existing in a city that's run by something distinctly inhuman. Mirror's Edge takes a city, shows you sign of life and other people, and yet maintains that feeling of claustrophobia and isolation. You can see people off in a distance, but yet you still feel like you're the only real human around. That to me is pretty impressive, and it's something I feel like doesn't get brought up as much as it should. Overall, Mirror's Edge is definitely not a game that gets everything right. Like I said, the story is very disjointed and jarring to keep up with. It's also way too short. With all of the footage in this video I did in one sitting, I beat the game in like under 3 hours. I could have done it in 2.5 hours hours, but I goofed off a lot and I had to pause the game a few times and go off and do other things. I know length in a game isn't really that big a deal. To me, it isn't something I worry about at all, but I know a lot of people don't really like short games, so I'm just putting that out there for those who do. Not a criticism as far as I'm concerned, but yeah. It takes itself way too seriously by having overly pretentious dialogue that means absolutely nothing.
Don't you read the news?
It's not news anymore. It's advertising.
She never mentioned a sister.
Yeah, well, we're not the mentioning kind.
Always want to swim in the big pond. Never see the bigger fish.
Characters that don't really leave any kind of impression, including Faith. Gun combat that feels out of place and obligatory because it's a first-person game, so it has to have shooter elements. But what it gets right makes Mirror's Edge one of my favourite games of all time. The gameplay never gets old, the gun combat is optional. In fact, the game kind of encourages avoiding combat entirely. Speaking of which, I was meant to expand on this point a little bit about how the game never forces you to, do a certain thing, but I forgot to include it in the script, so I'm going to talk about that real quick right here for a few seconds in a really off-the-cuff improv way. Another thing I really like about Mirror's Edge is that it's set up in such a way so that you never have to play the game in a certain way. You can fight a horde of enemies if you want, you can take on as many people as you like, or you can just avoid them entirely. Like this part in the train station, you can attack this guy, take his gun, and then shoot this guy and take his gun, and then just shoot everyone with the... just wipe everyone out and then carry on. Or alternatively, you can just vault over the whole thing and just carry on and avoid them completely. Or in this part in the shopping centre, you can go around, slide down the glass window thing, take down the guy with a machine gun, and shoot up an entire shopping centre, which is really fun. Or you could just go up on the rafters and avoid the whole thing entirely and carry on, which is really cool. I really like it. The way the game achieves isolation in a gigantic city is fantastic to me, and it has a bloody amazing soundtrack. Solar Fields is the absolute perfect choice for a game like this. I mean, I didn't even know they existed before this game, but I'm pretty glad I do now, because I like those guys a lot. Also, that main theme is one of my favourites in any game ever. It makes the game even more memorable for me. I love it, it's so goddamn good, I never get tired of it. And despite its flaws, Mirror's Edge is a perfect game to me, and I abso-goddamn-lutely cannot wait for the sequel, or prequel, or whatever it is. Also, on a tangent, I'm going to follow up on this point when I review Catalyst, so I might as well quickly mention it here. There is one thing I love about what Catalyst is doing, and one thing that I'm kinda cautious about. I really like the fact that Catalyst is removing gunfights entirely. From what I've read and seen, you can't actually engage enemies in that way whatsoever now, which is amazing. I'm pretty sure you can still take enemies down. I think I've seen footage of that happening, but you can't, you can't pick up a gun and shoot out a shopping centre, for example. Which, even though is a really fun thing to do, it's not a very Mirror's Edgy thing to do, so I'm really surprised that instead of EA trying to focus Mirror's Edge on, gun combat, it recognises that it doesn't really fit and they're letting them dial back on it a bit. That's really surprising to me, and it really shows that they care enough to recognise what made Mirror's Edge successful and different and unique, and they're expanding on that. They're expanding on what they did in the first game and just making the good parts better, I guess. Yeah. But I suppose you've got to give with the take, or whatever the phrase is, because what is a very EA decision is that Catalyst is apparently open world now. It kind of makes me wonder if the whole isolation, claustrophobia thing in Mirror's Edge, is that something that the game intentionally made me want to feel, or is that maybe me looking a bit too much into it? That's how I'm kind of wondering, because I don't know if I'll really feel that isolated or claustrophobic if I have an entire gigantic city to explore. So I don't really know. Will it still be able to keep that angle, or will it be compromising that thing in favour for open world? I don't know. It'd be kind of interesting to see, and like I said, DICE clearly does care about Mirror's Edge. They've been working on it for like 8 years now. They've been delaying it so they can work on it more. They clearly don't want to pump this game out. They clearly understand what made the first game so great, so I doubt they're putting this open world in just because that's what games do nowadays, so let's put in an open world. Clearly they aren't thinking about it that way, otherwise, they would have more gun combat in it. So I guess we'll have to wait and see when the game releases this May. They clearly know what they're doing, so I'm gonna leave it up to them. Hopefully I'm wrong. And I am rambling for ages about this, so I'm going to shut up now. I'm 100% not kidding when I say that Mirror's Edge Catalyst is the most hyped I've ever been for a game in my entire life, so I have a lot of expectations and hope and hype riding on this game, so please, for my sake, and for the sake of my happiness, EA, do not mess this one up. Please. Just don't mess it up. Oh.